give us an introduction on a bill that we've had on our wall for a while. And I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you. And so this is Representative Ryan Chena from Burlington, from the Old North End and the East District. Well, I'm in the Old North End, but I also represent the East District too. They're not as cool. Just kidding. All right. Everybody's cool. But I was going to prepare like a presentation, but I thought with 10 minutes, like it makes more sense to just talk about it. And then if you wanted to, I could always prepare something for the future if you were going to like take testimony on it or whatever, further testimony. But the bill is H420, interestingly, which was the number of a cannabis bill one year, actually. So H420, and it's I believe it's called an act relating to, I don't see it up there, but it's an act relating to year-round agriculture, something. I have the purpose though on my phone, so I'll just read you that. That the bill proposes to require the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to establish a pilot program to explore providing financial assistance to farmers to implement year-round agricultural practices in various geographic regions of Vermont. The bill would require the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets to adopt standards, criteria, or practices for year-round agriculture. In addition, the bill would appropriate funds to the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets for the purpose of implementing a year-round agricultural practice assistance program. And so what I thought I would do is, a short form bill is a purpose, but I wanted to explain like kind of the rationale for it and some ideas about how it could be implemented in hopes that you would at least take this into account in your decisions this year, whether or not you did anything with this bill as a vehicle, that there might be other bills you're working on that elements of this get integrated into, or that there might be existing work that you're doing that you think differently about because of this presentation. So that's really what my intent is. So the problem here that we are trying to solve is that climate change, whether you believe it's the result of our behavior as humans, or if one believes that it's just the cycles of nature, the ice ages, like natural ebb and flow of climate. The reality is that it's hitting us in Vermont, and that we're seeing more and more disastrous situations related to weather events, to adverse weather events, and that climate disasters threaten our food security. They threaten food security, for one, because they affect the local conditions that impact agricultural production. I know that some of you, if not many of you, are farmers, so you probably know better than me, but I do work with the land and grow food. And I've seen how the weather this summer within weeks, affected crops, like apples rotting and falling off the tree within days because of fungus that just attacked them, and like things, drying out and then too much water, and how that just it was hard to, on a micro level to grow food. And then that didn't even take into account the impact of the flooding on farms. And like in Burlington, the Intervale flooded, destroying a massive amount of crops and contaminating the soil with pollutants that wash downstream on the Winooski River from all the flooded places upstream. So these kinds of adverse weather events, as well as the minor changes to climate that happen over time, impact food production. Then on a global level, disasters impact production in the food that we import into Vermont. So that impacts the food supply. But then something that people don't talk about a lot are the supply lines. My brother works in an oil refinery, and they were given notice to stockpile food because of concerns about supply lines collapsing. So these are petrochemical workers being told, hey, you might want to stockpile food because there might be a disruption of your food supply. And so that kind of stuff is concerning to me, because if our ability to grow food locally is impacted because we haven't prepared for these changes and the supply lines are disrupted, what does that mean for Vermonters around food security? So in some way, we need to start thinking about how do we ensure food security for our people. And I think investing more in existing year-round agricultural practices and expanding them could provide a way to slowly adapt to climate change while building food resilience for ourselves. And perhaps if we do it at a large enough scale, we could even help out our neighbors in the states around us or inspire our neighbors to build onto our network. And there could be a regional networks of agricultural production. And perhaps then this could inspire like the world so that people think about, how do they take care of their own locally, but then be prepared to lend a helping hand to adjacent regions when disaster strikes. So the solution here is that maybe we could invest in some pilot projects to explore the creation of a statewide and regional support network, kind of like an agricultural mutual aid network that relies primarily on local capacity with backup from the network. So how that might work, like locally, would be perhaps like I should just speak this is Burlington centric because it's where I live. So, but I'm giving this to you as an example because for me to talk about what you should do, like in Barnard, like I can give you some ideas, but I don't live there. So I would be speculating. But like if, for example, let's say in Burlington, there was a pilot project to build greenhouses down in the Intervale that use the waste heat of the McNeil wood plant to keep them warm year round. And next to these greenhouses were storage and production facilities. Then we could be growing food throughout the year, not only in the farms at the Intervale, but in the greenhouses. The farms could use the greenhouses, the community could use them. There could be facilities where production happens, whether that be, taking corn and removing it from the cob and grinding it into meal and storing it, or whether that be someone said I had to say chicken slaughtering in this committee for some reason. Was there some poultry bill or something?
Yeah.
So whether that be,
Chicken parts.
yeah, whether that be the production of, whether it be slaughtering and production and storage of meat or something. I don't eat meat, but it's a need, I guess, for people. So that this happens there, but then let's say like a disaster strikes in Washington County and the food supply is impacted. If there's enough food in Burlington, we're close enough that we could be shipping food down to Montpelier to feed people who were impacted by a flood. That's like the mutual aid, or I mean, we could even ship it all the way to the south of Vermont if we needed to. But if we did this right, we wouldn't have to, because maybe if a disaster strikes in like the Bennington area, Brattleboro would have enough to ship it over the mountains, to them to help. So some proposed guidelines that I would want you to consider because if you read the purpose of the bill, it's very broad. And so if the committee were going to do this, you'd want to take some testimony and I think give some more direction to the Agency of Agriculture, is that Agricultural Food and Markets? Yes. Some guidelines I would suggest: not being a farmer, but just being an amateur food grower. Although I do come from a long line of farmers. So like my ancestors were farmers for like thousands of years under the iron fist of colonizers, but they had a close relationship with their land. And they taught a lot of stuff to me that we would start with the plants that are likely to thrive in Vermont as climate change progresses, because what we're hearing is we're going to lose some of our greatest assets. I mean, it's heartbreaking to think that our maple production is going to be impacted, but I'm hearing that these sugar maples are considered like a Goldilocks species. I think that's the term they use, that there has to be just right conditions, and that we have those conditions now. But if we become North Carolina or Virginia, we don't have those conditions in terms of the weather. And so what's that going to mean for maples? And so we should be thinking, what are the species over the next 100 years that are likely to thrive here? And really like making sure that as much as I want to preserve what we have, we also have to cut our losses at some point and say, we'll try to preserve these things, but we need to be investing in like what's going to actually live here that people could eat. I guess the good news is that they can grow a lot more. What are we zone 4? What are we zone 3, 4? And what are they in Virginia, 5 or 6 or something? So, I mean, if we're going to be more like zone 5 or 6, we could be thinking ahead, like how do we prepare to grow more of those things? They grow here already, but how do we grow more of those things year round? We also need to be taking into consideration pests and the invasive species that might be coming. How do we build a zero waste infrastructure? So are there ways to to engage in waste management around agriculture on site more than we do now. I know we already do a lot of this, but I think that could be integrated into the community's waste management, like sort of like community. Maybe an example would be like the biodigester in Middlebury that you probably have talked about. How Middlebury College has a biodigester. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's an example of like there might be ways to like use agricultural waste as fuel for local endeavors, even just for the farm trucks and stuff, you know, running off of it. And then the farmers don't have to use fossil fuels that are shipped in from around the world. They could use biogas from their manure, you know. I would argue that we should look at collective ownership. For example, in North Dakota, about 100 years ago, the farmers were sort of, what's the word? Limited by the control of resources by out-of-state people like banks. So they would have to like borrow money from out-of-state banks to finance their farms, and then they would have to ship all this food out of state to agricultural production facilities. But the farmers organized and they actually ran people for office under the Nonpartisan League and took over the state of North Dakota and then started a state bank and state agricultural production facilities. And then they tried to secede from the United States, but we won't go there. And then their governor went to jail and got out and got reelected or something like that. But the point is that it's not all of that trauma. We don't want that. But like the idea was that farmers organized because they realized that they were part of an extractive economy where their labor and their time and their money was being sucked out of their state and like sent off to Wall Street. And they were able to like resist that and build the local facilities to reinvest into the economy, the local economy. And North Dakota has a really decent economy considering, and part of that is the recent oil boom, but that infrastructure that goes back 100 years of the state bank and the state agricultural production facilities. So I guess what I'm getting at is like, maybe we should look at communal production facilities, you know, collectively owned, whether it be by a town or by a group of farmers, by the state. I'm not attached, but this idea of communal resources, community assets, things like production facilities or seed banks, or storage facilities, waste management facilities. So the last thing I just want to cover, because I'm trying to be quick, keep it under 10 minutes. And I also want to get back to my committee because we're hearing stories of people who are impacted by health inequities. I just want to talk a little bit about the benefits versus costs. If we think about the true cost of the current system, we don't take into account a lot of the cost. So unfortunately, we talk about the bottom line is never the full bottom line. And when we take into account the impact on the social determinants of health of extractive agriculture versus regenerative agriculture, the cost, I think, does outweigh the benefits, but because we don't necessarily recognize how we're kind of like, we're going into the red, even though we don't see it. Like if the balance sheet doesn't show you it, it might say we're in the black, you know, but we're actually going into the red in terms of like the impact on the ability of the earth to sustain life, you know, for the long term at the scale it does now. Like there might be creatures that continue to live, but our behavior is leading to mass extinction. Well, it has caused mass extinction. And if we continue as humans, what's going to be left? So I think that aside, let's look at the things we do look at. The infrastructure to build this may be expensive up front, but if we do it right, it may not be expensive to maintain. And so that upfront cost may pay itself back over time by what we get out of it. There's a current challenge with workforce across all sectors, and I think it impacts the agricultural sector too, from what I hear, that if we did this right, maybe around these communal facilities, we can build housing for workers, and that the housing that we build could be seasonal housing. So when people come into work at different times of the year for like the harvesting of different crops, it's kind of like dorm style housing. People can come and go. There might be a way to co-locate these year-round agricultural production facilities with facilities for the workforce. These could also include wellness facilities that could be shared with the community, like pools and spas and saunas, like they do in Scandinavia, and like gyms, etc. Community kitchens, and then and so some other benefits. Yeah, money can stay local. The housing with seasonal uses. Oh, there would be a lower cost due to reduced transportation. That the expense on fossil fuels would be reduced if we were investing in these localized networks. Waste management, I covered. Climate resilience. Yeah, and so I guess one of the biggest benefits here is food security, because food security and access to food is an important social determinant of health. And so if all Vermonters were being guaranteed food, it may not be like avocado toast, but it could be kale and potatoes and like locally grown meat. You know, if people were guaranteed these things year round, it would drastically improve the health. I mean, we can still have avocados. There's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know if they'll ever grow here. You probably know better than me. But I was just using it as an example. We may not have all the things we want, but we could have the basic things we need to keep us healthy through the climate resilience, and that the cost of that, the benefits of that over time are vastly amplified, that it's generational. So if during this generation, we can build the infrastructure to guarantee food to future generations, that in the long term, it would be a very worthy investment. So last but not least, like what are some examples? I mentioned how in Burlington we could use the Intervale as a place, but there is other work we're doing in Burlington. I have a group called Isham Street Gardening and Other Optimistic Doings, and we are working with UVM now on like the idea of victory gardens. Like we already do greenbelt gardening and gardening in the front lawns of people's homes, along a certain walkway, but we're going to have students working with us to study what can grow where better and building infrastructure with this grant so that we can build infrastructure in the public area for people to eat food as they walk through. And so, you know, how might that, what we might do with this kind of a pilot project would be to work with the Intervale, and because we're trying to link to them anyway, that there could be greenhouses either there or along the way, so people could be growing food year round. And when I say food, I'm talking about vegetables, because a point was made earlier that certain kinds of meat production is year round. But maybe we would have community coops, you know, or community goat pens where you can go milk your own goats. I don't know. Maybe that's unrealistic, but I think it would be nice. And so in a rural area, this is not my area of expertise, but I've thought about it. It could be that maybe there's a place where a few farms converge with state land, and the state says, okay, we can by building a road from the road to this area where these properties converge, we can build a facility. These 3 farms can use it, and then other people can come, you know, so we'd have to do some kind of assessment about what sites make sense. But I'm sure that if we put RFPs out there, or whatever the pilot project process would be, that we would find that people on the local level would come up with ideas. Or farmers would say, okay, we're already sharing, you know, resources this way, you know, or maybe there'd be a case where like farmers don't get along, and this would like help them settle their differences and work together. You know, like if there's disputes over like who gets to use water here or there, I don't know. I know that it can be complicated out there. So I don't feel like I'm the one to speak to the rural issues, and that hearing from some farmers from rural areas about how they might use this would make sense. And hearing from the Agency of Agriculture, hearing from some climate scientists. So I guess I would just end with saying that I'm hoping that the presentation of this bill gets you thinking more about how to integrate ways to move towards year-round food production, and on a bigger scale, not just like dairy, but vegetables, eggs, we'll have fruits, legumes, or however you say it properly, et cetera, grains, you know, that just thinking, how do we move in this direction to ensure access to food to people in Vermont year round and build resilience as we go through climate change. So I'll stop there for any questions.
Thank you very much, Representative Chena. I know you said you need to get back to your own committee, but are there questions?
I don't know how there could be after all that.
It was
Wide ranging.
comprehensive for a short form bill, I think. And we can track you down in the hallways.
One volume?
If we've got follow-up questions, I mean, I actually think there was a lot there, so we can find you and
Yeah.
have a side conversation in the hallway at some point if,
All right.
okay, thank you.
And I'll keep an eye on what your committee's doing. And if I have any ideas, I won't ask to come in again, but I might send you an email and say, would you consider, adding this here or there?
Yeah,
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you later.
Good luck.
You know John Clark?
Can